One by one, team members approached to exchange a few words with Aubrey. There were firm handshakes, brief but meaningful hugs, and glances that conveyed more than words ever could. "Good luck, Aubrey," was often said, accompanied by a respectful nod. Aubrey responded to each gesture with gratitude and appreciation. "Thank you all," he replied repeatedly. "It was your hard work and dedication that made this moment possible." With a last look back, Aubrey headed for the passageway. He stood there for a moment, on the border between his known world and the absolute unknown. Inhaling deeply, he took a few more steps forward to cross the point of no return. The room fell into respectful silence, all eyes fixed on the point where Aubrey would disappear. Despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, one thing was certain. Aubrey had left an indelible mark on his team and had embarked on a journey that could change human understanding of the universe forever. As Aubrey crossed the threshold of the passageway, he was immediately enveloped by a foreign sensation, as if every molecule of his being was simultaneously being stretched and compressed. There was a blinding, pulsating light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. In this whirlwind of sensations, Aubrey felt a mixture of wonder, fear, and excitement. There was an almost surreal beauty in the patterns and sounds around him, but also a deep anxiety about the unknown. His scientific mind was fascinated by experience, even in the whirlwind of the incomprehensible. When Aubrey emerged from the passageway, his mind was overwhelmed by a feeling of dizziness and disorientation. He lay breathless, trying to gather his thoughts in a whirlwind of sensations. At first, Aubrey felt his body to be distant, almost foreign. Every movement was accompanied by a slight nausea. Every attempt to straighten up provoked vertigo, so he remained motionless, eyes closed, breathing deeply to calm the inner turmoil. After several minutes, Aubrey slowly rose to his feet, overcoming the remnants of his daze. He felt a renewed determination wash over him. Whatever the nature of this world, he was determined to discover its secrets, to understand where or when it was. He was a scientist after all, and every fiber of his being was geared towards discovery and understanding. Aubrey concentrated on one of his top priorities, establishing communication with his team on the other side of the passage. He knew that the success of this attempt was crucial, not only to report his findings, but also to maintain a vital link with his homeworld. Aubrey removed from his suit the communication device designed specifically for this mission. He activated it, hoping for even a weak connection with his team. Every attempt at communication was meticulous and calculated, Aubrey following the protocols established before his departure. However, every effort was met with the same result: absolute silence and a total absence of response. As Aubrey began to explore the immediate surroundings of his arrival point, he was struck by a disconcerting sense of familiarity. The landscape stretching out before him could have been taken straight from Earth. Before him stretched a vast meadow, covered in lush green grass. The view was soothing, almost picturesque, with wildflowers dotted here and there. On the horizon, a dense forest rose up, its tall, sturdy trees forming a natural barrier. The trees were of species that looked familiar to him: oaks, maples, and perhaps pines. The sky above him was limpid blue, with white clouds floating lazily. The sun shone with an intensity and warmth reminiscent of summer days on Earth. Aubrey, driven by his scientific instincts and the need to understand his environment, took out his portable atmospheric analyzer. The results began to appear, and Aubrey was stunned by what he saw. The composition of the atmosphere was astonishingly similar to that of Earth. Oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide were present in almost identical proportions to those of his native environment. The concentration of oxygen was sufficient to support human life, while nitrogen, the major component of the Earth's atmosphere, was also present in large quantities. Aubrey remained absorbed in the data for a moment, trying to make sense of these discoveries. If the atmosphere was so similar to Earth's, did that mean he was still on his home planet, but in a different era? Or was it a parallel world that shared characteristics with Earth? All the data pointed to a conclusion which, though extraordinary, seemed the only logical explanation. Aubrey came to the shocking conclusion that he hadn't traveled through space, but through time. He was probably still on Earth, but in a different era, perhaps even one that predated civilization as he knew it. With this realization came an acute sense of isolation. Aubrey was alone, separated not only by distance, but also by time, from everything he knew and loved. He felt like a ghost, a silent observer of a bygone era. In a moment of bold decision, Aubrey prepared to remove his astronaut helmet. The conclusion that the air around him was identical to that on pre-industrial Earth had prompted him to take this crucial step. As Aubrey traversed the meadow and approached the forest's edge, his attention was drawn to the presence of life in that distant era. He noticed familiar species, such as birds and small mammals. Emerging into a clearing, Aubrey spotted structures that appeared to be dwellings. They were rudimentarily built, with materials such as wood, earth, and straw. These constructions evoked a pre-industrial, perhaps even medieval era. Aubrey was assailed by a wave of intense emotions, all centered around one nagging question: could these be human beings? The thought alone made his heart beat faster, injecting a dose of adrenaline into his veins. He wondered how a presumably human society, apparently at a relatively primitive stage of development, could coexist with the knowledge and technologies of his time. He took the immediate decision to retreat to a discreet corner, out of sight. Aubrey felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of his discovery. He knew he had to proceed with caution. Any interaction with humans from this era could have unpredictable consequences. Aubrey therefore decided to remain hidden, to take the time to observe from a distance, to learn and understand before considering any contact. Aubrey stood there, transfixed, watching them. Their movements, the way they interacted, everything about them screamed humanity. It was a revelation that hit him hard. He was in the presence of human beings from another era. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with wonder and a surreal sense of strangeness. Sitting alone in his hiding place overlooking the village, he pondered chaos theory and the butterfly effect. He contemplated the impact of his technology and knowledge, which if discovered could irreversibly alter the technological and cultural development of this era. After weeks of solitude and deep reflection, Aubrey realized that his need for social interaction was too powerful to ignore. The isolation had become unbearable, and he felt that even minimal contact with the inhabitants of this time was essential to his mental and emotional health. As night fell, he discreetly approached a place where clothes were being left to dry. Moving cautiously, he chose clothes that seemed to fit him. Early in the morning, as the first light of dawn broke through, Aubrey headed for the village. He advanced cautiously, his heart pounding at the thought of this first encounter. Aubrey slipped in among them, doing his best to blend into the crowd, imitating their gestures and gait. The opportunity for a first contact arose when a villager, a middle-aged man, approached him curiously. The man greeted him in an ancient language Aubrey vaguely recognized. Cautiously, Aubrey replied with a nod and a smile. He indicated that he was a traveler and mimed actions, such as eating and drinking, to indicate his basic needs. After this first physical and verbal contact with the villagers, he was overwhelmed by an immense and immeasurable happiness. To speak and be heard, to touch and be touched, was like crossing an invisible bridge between two worlds. As he interacted with the villagers, Aubrey began to pick up familiar words and phrases. Although the language was clearly an older form of French, his experience with modern French enabled him to understand the gist of what was being said. When asked where he was from, Aubrey replied that he was a traveler from a distant land, a vague but plausible answer that aroused interest without arousing too much suspicion. In the course of his interactions with the villagers, Aubrey had sought to learn more about the place and time in which he found himself. He had asked subtle questions about their king, their customs, and recent events, presenting himself as an uninformed traveler of the region. The answers he received gradually painted a picture of the times. References to historical figures, events, and practices allowed him to deduce that he was in the 10th century. This realization struck him with amazement and excitement. He had traveled back in time more than a millennium,